Today, we're going to get into a legal battle that honestly sounds like something out of a movie. We're talking about a group of dolphins, whales, and other marine mammals who took on the Philippine government and an international oil company. And they didn't just file a complaint, they took their case all the way to the Supreme Court. Okay, let's just get right to it, because this is the big, kind of mind-bending question at the heart of this whole thing. How can animals who can't speak our language, can't hire a lawyer, can't sign a document, end up as the main plaintiffs in a major court case? It sounds pretty much impossible, right? Well, the answer is way more fascinating than you'd think. So, our story starts in the Tañon Strait. Picture this. It's this incredibly beautiful and really important body of water nestled between two major islands in the Philippines. Back in 1998, it was officially declared a Protected Seascape. And that wasn't just a nice title. It meant this whole area, which is just teeming with life, including tons of different dolphins and whales, was supposed to be under special legal protection. But of course, that's where the conflict starts to brew. In 2004, the government signed this contract. It's known as Service Contract 46, with a Japanese company, JAPEX, to start exploring for oil and gas, right in the middle of the supposedly protected area. By 2005, JAPEX was out there doing these massive seismic surveys. And that's when a group of environmentalists and local fisherfolk decided, no way, and they filed a lawsuit in 2007 to shut the whole thing down. Now, before the court could even start talking about oil exploration, they had to deal with this huge legal roadblock called locus standi. It's a fancy term for legal standing. Basically, you can't just sue someone because you don't like what they're doing. You have to prove that you have a personal stake in the game, that you're what's called a real party in interest. It really is like having a ticket. Without it, you can't even get in the stadium to argue the call. And this is where things got really interesting. The people suing on behalf of the dolphins put forward this really radical idea, one that was famously captured by U.S. Supreme Court Justice William O. Douglas way back in 1972, that nature itself should have a voice in court. You know, the idea that a river or a forest, or in this case a whole community of marine mammals, is a living thing that can be harmed and deserves to be represented. So how in the world did the Philippine Supreme Court figure this one out? Well, they did it in a few clever steps. First, they acknowledged the problem. Under the law, only natural persons, that's you and me, or juridical persons, think corporations, can actually file a lawsuit. Dolphins don't fit in either box. But they pointed out that Philippine law tends to be pretty flexible on this issue in environmental cases, and that led them to this really powerful tool called the citizen suit. This rule basically lets any citizen sue on behalf of others, including future generations, to protect the environment. And that was the key. So the court said while the dolphins themselves can't technically be the plaintiffs, their human advocates, these stewards, could be. Their voices could be heard through their human representatives. So with that whole who can sue question settled, the main event could finally begin. And the case against this oil contract was really fought on two big fronts. First, the constitutional challenge. Did this contract violate the highest law of the land? And second, the environmental law challenge. Did it break the specific laws put in place to protect places like the Tañon Strait? After years and years of legal arguments, the Supreme Court finally handed down its decision, and it was a knockout blow for the petitioners. The verdict? Service Contract 46 was declared null and void, totally invalid. So what was the court's reasoning for throwing out the entire contract? Well, the first major reason was that it was fundamentally unconstitutional. The court found two huge fatal flaws. You see, the Constitution has a very specific checklist for these kinds of agreements with foreign companies. First, it requires the president of the Philippines personally to sign off on them. But in this case, only the Secretary of Energy signed it. Second, the Constitution demands that Congress be notified within 30 days. That just didn't happen. And the court was clear. These aren't just minor details or procedural hiccups. They are essential safeguards to protect the nation's resources, and you just can't ignore them. But that wasn't all. The problems with the contract went even deeper. On top of being unconstitutional, the court also found that it was just straight up illegal because it broke a number of existing environmental laws. The contract trampled all over some really key environmental rules. For one, the Tañon Strait is a protected area under what's called the NIPAS Act. That status means any big project needs an environmental compliance certificate, or an ECC, before it gets started. The surveys were done without one. But here's the real kicker. The NIPAS Act says that if you want to exploit energy resources in a protected area, you need a specific law passed by Congress to allow it. And for the Tañon Strait, no such law was ever passed. It's like the project just pretended the area's protected status didn't exist.
And look, this was never just some abstract legal debate. This had very real, very damaging consequences for the people who live there. The local fisherfolk who depend on that strait to feed their families reported that after those seismic surveys started, their daily fish catch plummeted by a staggering 50 to 70%. I mean, imagine that. You go from catching 15 or 20 kilos a day down to just 1 or 2. That number just shows you the tangible harm that was at the absolute heart of this lawsuit. So, what's the lasting impact of this absolutely incredible case? Well, it's considered a landmark victory for a few really important reasons. It seriously strengthened that citizen suit concept, empowering everyday people to stand up and act as guardians for the environment. It sent a powerful message that the safeguards in the Constitution are not just suggestions, they are ironclad rules. And it set a huge precedent for protecting the nation's most ecologically important areas.
We started this explainer with a pretty wild question. Can dolphins sue the government? And what the Supreme Court essentially said was, well, maybe not directly, but through dedicated human stewards, their voice can and will be heard in a court of law. And that really leaves us all with a much bigger question to think about. In a world where our environment is increasingly at risk, who gets to speak for it? And how do we make sure those voices are heard?